Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same. This podcast is a little different from most of the others in the Talking Toughness series. Today's very special guest is Monika Lozinskienė, who is a very talented and successful concert pianist who has won many prestigious awards for her performances. In addition, as an artist entrepreneur, in 2018, Monika founded and directs the Kaunas Piano Fest, a piano festival and series of masterclasses in her native Lithuania, which has now become an annual event. Now, Monika inhabits the world of the performing arts, which is one of the toughest worlds in which incredibly talented people seek to make their mark, and very many don't. And this, of course, includes musicians, actors, dancers, artists, and so on. Monika has also had a deep interest in the psychology of operating in this world, especially in exploring performance anxiety, which she did for her dissertation when a student at the Scottish Conservatoire. This took her to exploring and understanding the mental toughness concept. So together we can explore this further in this truly fascinating discussion, which provides an insight into a world that few know and understand. And yet it has so many parallels in the worlds of sport, work, and education. There's a lot to learn from this discussion. So, welcome, Monika. What stimulated your interest in the subject of mental toughness?
So when I was studying in Glasgow, I think I was in the third year of bachelor's. Since my teenage years, I've been really struggling with performance anxiety. And I was looking for many different ways how to improve my stage presence, how to feel more confident. And I don't know if you know, but in the art world, all the information about performance anxiety is kind of vague a little bit. I mean, probably not today, but it was 7 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. And I think a friend who studied something along the lines of mental skills, she said, she introduced me to this concept of mental toughness. And then I bought your book, Mental Toughness, and I was really excited to read about it, and especially to learn how much of the mental preparation should go into a peak performance. And I think as musicians, we very often we focus so much on actual playing, but we don't spend enough time on mental preparation because there's so much stress around performing and so on. So this is why I thought that learning about mental toughness might actually help me improve my feeling on stage.
And then what did you do?
And what did I do? What did I do? Then I actually wrote a whole master thesis about mental toughness. And I was very interested to find out that actually I have a low self-belief, but very high self-confidence. And I've never understood that actually these two things can be separate things. So I realized how important self-belief is. And this is I think still going in my head that, you have to improve self-belief. And I think we also talked with you, Doug, on my podcast, how important it is to actually believe that you can achieve that goal which you want to achieve on stage. And I've done some visualization practices, and and then I founded my own podcast to kind of talk about all different aspects which go into performing and making music and being an artist. And now I realize that mental toughness could be good not only on stage, but around building career in music, because it is very challenging in many ways, because there's a lot of instability and uncertainty, and you have to be in charge. You have to be in charge in so many ways. So I think mental toughness is useful for every single musician.
Oh, absolutely. And I think by anybody's standards, your career would be described as a success. And although you speak about performance anxiety, from what I can see on social media, your career is thriving, and,
Thank you.
well done.
Thank you, Doug.
What would you describe are the main stressors in the performing arts, and particularly music?
So I think there is huge exposure when you are on stage. And I know that you might compare it with giving a speech, for example. But with a performance, I think it's next level, because you have to learn the music. So sometimes you study years. If it's a big piece, you have to memorize the piece, memorize the music, and perform it in front of the audience. And I think in a way, it is very important to train your head, to train your mind, so you don't throw yourself from this performance mode. Because what happens on stage, you suddenly become too aware of what's happening. And you become very self-critical of all your mistakes, of all your insecurities. And then the performance kind of loses the confidence, so to say. So I think being able to not to be too critical while performing, but this cannot happen only on stage. You have to train yourself in the practice room to be ready to perform. So, I mean, every circumstances are very different. I think for me, playing in front of the jury and doing a lot of competitions was very, very tough. It's a next level thing, especially making art in such a competitive environment. It's very much like athletes, It's very much like athletes, but again, it's art. So I don't know why this whole culture started. Although it's drifting a little bit. I think it was very, very active maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and now musicians realize that competing in competitions is not necessarily the thing to go, because I think we are not athletes. I mean, we shouldn't be like athletes. I mean, I understand that our profession kind of makes us a little bit like athletes because we have to train every day. Otherwise, we lose the stamina, we lose the skill. But anyway, it's about making beautiful things and presenting them to people. So I don't know if I answered the question. What was the question?
I thought you answered it brilliantly, Monika, and I mean I'm super interested in this. So I work as a sports psychologist, so that I'm kind of thinking about this a lot, and thinking about, I messaged Doug earlier, I think it was about 10 years ago. I was talking to people at Royal College of Music in London and things, and what I thought was so interesting there was your distinction between adopting mentally tough behaviors on stage to deal with a performance versus kind of being mentally tough generally. And I think that's such an important distinction, because in a sense, being able to perform when you have high levels of anxiety is well, that's kind of normal. Like working with elite athletes, most of them have terrible anxiety because you're trying to produce something that you've worked so hard to get to, and it might go wrong. So I think it's normal to feel anxious. So being mentally tough there doesn't mean not feeling anxious, but you're adopting, you kind of learning how to act in a tough way, in a sense. Doesn't mean that you're automatically mentally tough. A bit like a common example was give is an introvert can go give an amazing presentation and be funny and engaging, but they'll probably be exhausted afterwards because they've had to really kind of act the part, if you will. So I think someone who's particularly mentally sensitive but has to behave in a tough way is probably going to be more exhausted. They'll get through the performance, produce something brilliant, great. But then when you're talking about the impact in everyday life, so you've done that performance, great. Tomorrow you've got to practice a new piece or you've got to work on something else. The one who's used all of their resources to get through the performance the previous evening, they're going to struggle to get up and do it again the next day. And I think that's where the general aspect of mental toughness really, really helps as well. So I love that distinction. And I'm also interested, where you spoke about kind of confidence in your abilities to do something versus belief. I'm always really interested in these kind of different layers of self-belief kind of concepts. Would you be able to unpick that a little bit more for us?
On self-belief and confidence. I think it's very interesting because probably self-belief is a little bit more about the skill. I don't know if I'm not mistaken, but I feel like self-belief is about when you learn something and you have to trust that you can do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know that you can do it. You have to know that you can deliver. And I think that's very often because sometimes, in music world, you can meet people who are maybe not so self-confident, but then they will actually deliver because they know that they can deliver the performance, they can deliver the music in front of the audience. So I think it's almost like two different skills. And for me, it was very interesting because I thought that it's kind of the same thing, but now I know that it's two different things. So I also wanted to reflect what you said regarding being mentally tough and sensitive. And actually, after the conversation with Doug, I thought, what does it mean to be mentally tough for a musician? So I guess if you are too mentally sensitive, most likely you will never even step on stage, even though you could perform, right? But this mental toughness probably is that even though you feel horrible, you will still go and do it. So you will still put yourself in a character. And also, I think, interestingly, these days, the culture in music, and especially in classical music, there is an environment for being more mentally tough. So I think maybe 100 years ago, musicians didn't need that much, because nowadays you are expected, to play 100 concerts per year. And for example, a pianist like Yuja Wang, like the crazy amounts she performances, it's beyond understanding. And, she flies different continents and she plays different repertoire, solo performances with orchestra, and she can pull it off. And as you said, some people might need to recover longer. I for example, I know this very special fatigue which comes after the concert. So, it's very interesting. Always my back hurts, like never, just after performance, there's a special back pain, I would say.
Yeah.
And this incredible exhaustion. Like that, you are drained throughout your body, so to say. So I think it's very different what's required from musicians. And yeah, I feel like maybe nowadays in the 21st century, we are a little bit more like athletes than we used to be, I think the pace was much, much slower previously, and we didn't need those qualities that much as we need it today.
Yeah, and I suppose there's the added strain on the performance anxiety part there is while you have more control over your performance than most athletes because you don't have an opponent who's trying to stop you, you kind of have to hit 100%. You might play a couple of thousand notes or something. You got to hit every one. Like what was the statistic that was going around recently? Like throughout Roger Federer's tennis career, won 80% of matches, but actual points, he won 54% of points that he played, just over half. He lost almost as many points as he won throughout his career, and he's probably the greatest tennis player ever.
Wow!
But you wouldn't be a great pianist if you hit the wrong note 46% of the time.
Yeah, I think that's the complication, which I find once we start comparing sports with music, because obviously there is a huge amount of training which goes, like, for example, if you're training for marathon, right? You are training your body. But in music, you are also required to memorize a set of notes, and also there is plus interpretation, and you have to deliver the notes as accurate as possible, because then you will not be able to project what composer wanted. I mean, maybe this is the reason why less and less people actually pursue such a career, because it is very challenging on your brain, and like you really have to dedicate yourself. So I think being a musician and performing at high standard is like athlete, but plus.
Yeah, I just another question I have, and not hog it too much. I'll let Doug get a word in soon. So I'm interested, when you were talking about belief, this sort of knowledge that you believe that you can do something. I was starting to think then, because when I talk to certainly sport performers, I would imagine this would be even more so in performing arts. The kind of the level of unconscious flow kind of thing. Like if you have that genuine belief that you're able to do something, and you kind of just have to manage your anxiety and get into the right zone, how much of a performance then kind of happens subconsciously? Because I'm guessing just like if I was working with a footballer, they're not thinking about, I need to move into this space now. They just kind of do it because they've trained that way. But how unconscious is a performance, I suppose I'm saying?
It's very interesting, because I actually did a podcast with this professor of engineering called Barbara Oakley, and she studies about learning. She wrote this book, Learning How to Learn, and I asked her about the stress and why you forget the notes and stuff, So she talked about these two different learning systems. So you have a declarative learning system and procedural.
Yeah.
And you have a procedural learning system. And as I understand, playing piano and, for example, learning sports go through this procedural learning system, because this system is responsible for habits. So maybe in the beginning, we use the declarative system because, you are trying to figure out what type of moves you're doing. For example, if you're serving in tennis, you are aware, where is your elbow? How will you serve?
Yeah.
And same happens with music in the early stages. You are thinking about the notes, about your technical difficulties. And once you internalize the material, it goes to the procedural memory. And actually the skill stays longer there, right? So how she explained is that if you start being too conscious in the performance, you throw yourself out of that procedural system.
Yeah.
So you kind of you do yourself a bad favor, because once you are in that procedural system, you can achieve that flow, what we're talking about. So I think for me that was very interesting, and it kind of makes sense, because I think every time when I start to be too conscious about what I'm doing on stage, then it kind of, everything loses its sense, and like you kind of get stressed. And recently I used this tool. I was recording for our YouTube channel, and I was playing a Chopin etude, like extremely difficult etude. And I was, struggling with technique. And then I tried to imagine that I'm telling someone else's story. So I imagined a girl walking in meadows and kind of like just thinking, about her going somewhere. And suddenly all the technical bits happened, it was much easier. I didn't stumble. I could perform from beginning till the end. So
that's, once you stop trying to cognitively override the skill that you have.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. It feels like once you try harder, it kind of, you actually perform worse. I don't know if if it's that the case.
Yeah, I suppose you have even from a neural network point of view, it's a much smoother system when it's that procedural part. But then what happens, of course, is when people become anxious or they have self-doubt and they don't have the resources to be able to effectively manage that, we kind of strive to want to control things a little bit more, which means we start trying to be a little bit more cognitive, a bit more declarative, a bit more, which is why something that you just have to kind of get out your own way and let it happen. We end up just ruining it because we get in our own way, because that it's hard to just trust that, no, my brain will make sure that the motor neurons in my fingers will recruit the right muscles at the right time, and it'll play what it needs to play. I've just got to kind of get out of the way and let it happen. You have to put some serious trust in that, and I think that's what in those kind of flow state procedural kind of skills, that's probably what being tough really is, right? So I'm going to trust that all this work I've done in memorizing, even that muscle memory of what's happening, I'm going to trust that it's going to see me right and not be tempted to almost hang over it like a micromanager.
Yeah, so kind of not to interfere with yourself. But for me, the question is, how do you build that self-belief and that self-trust?
I suppose it depends what kind of level of self-belief and self-trust you're looking at. So people can get there through over-learning. So you learn to the point where you no longer need to think about it, and you have it. So like when we learn to drive, you eventually, probably a good bit after people have passed their driving test, they get to a point where they overlearn driving. So you stop having to cognitively think about driving. You recognize the hazards, but you're not thinking about what my arms and legs need to do to slow down and speed up or change gear or anything like that. But then there's the kind of what you see in expert performance is this ability to produce novel things as well, and that's not just through learning. So whether that's in sport, whether that's in performing arts, whether that's in business, like when people are able to kind of bring their own kind of take on something, they produce that bit of novelty. So even with different pianists, the sheet music could look exactly the same, but people just have their own way of moving between the notes, or just slight differences. Where I know there's studies where pianists are brilliant at being able to pick out their own performance, even though you could play them 20 what should be identical performances. Like, oh no, that one's me. I know that. And it's that's the really interesting bit, because that's not just over learning something to the point where you can do it unconsciously, but that's being able to sort of feel something and interpret it. And that's the bit where it becomes an art, really, isn't it? And that's the bit I'm always fascinated in, because that's the bit that gives you the sense of, I'm not just doing what I'm supposed to do, but this is mine. There's like a level of ownership on this. This is me that I'm putting into this. And it's easier to feel more confident when I think, well, I'm being me. I know me. I know me. I'm not just following instructions. It's probably a waffly way to get there, but that's how I'd interpret it anyway.
Yeah, I could definitely reflect. I noticed that the best performers are people who are not scared of failing, but and then those mistakes, they don't overshadow the risk. So they are willing to take the risk, even though they know that they might do mistakes. And those performances are the most exciting.
That's interesting. That takes me to a question, because we've looked at competition, we've looked at performance, but there's one other area that sport and the performing arts share, and that's everyone's a critic. You know, there are so many people go to watch sport, and when you listen to them, they're not supporting their team. They're very often lambasting their team. I'm an addictive, compulsive YouTuber, and I listen to a lot of music on YouTube, and I'm always astonished how many critical comments there are in the comment section. You know, when you look at what they're doing. How do you deal with critics and the critical and that sort of thing?
Oh, that's a very interesting point. I never realized that actually these fields are criticized so much by people who have no clue about these fields. For me, I always think that I myself, I would never write a bad comment. You know, maybe I notice that something is wrong, but I would never go this extra mile and, you know, write a comment. So, I mean, I'm lucky, I guess, because I haven't received so many bad comments, especially online. But obviously, our education is very much built on getting feedback from teachers, from peers. So it's interesting, because I think it does affect many things in your career and many things, the way you play. I guess if there would be a slightly different approach, maybe people would be a bit more courageous, because it's really, you know, we learn through criticism. Oh, you play this wrong. And but again, from the same conversation with Barbara, she actually mentioned that music is one of these fields where you really need to have a mentor, because it makes a huge difference when you play to somebody else. You know, it's not like math, where you can maybe study privately, you know, from books. You really need to hear the second opinion. So I don't know. I'm pretty sensitive. I think I can be very mentally tough and very mentally sensitive. I think I'm black and white at the same time.
Hmm.
Well, that makes you normal, Monica. We're all like that. We're all a mixture of mental toughness and mental sensitivity.
The artistry is very important these days, but I think that if you want to have a career, being mentally tough nowadays is more important than artistry, because you will not get noticed. So there is a lot of pushing. I remember we had this conversation with our coach for team coach. I have a duo, and we had a coaching, and she said, once I said like, oh, I'm so tired from pushing, looking for opportunities and making myself visible and writing these grants and constantly pushing. And she said, just so we're clear, if you want to be successful, you will always have to push.